Ready.
Greetings, this is Kirk Matuszek from the Fell Inn in lovely downtown Simpson. And today I'm going to be talking about this current news cycle and on a continued theme of fake news. What's happening right now, last week, I think it was the 17th, ABC, I was listening to Martha Raddatz, who's the senior foreign correspondent for ABC, and she mentioned that two-thirds of Americans believe Russians hacked the election. What is very significant about this is that Martha gets paid about $3 million a year to report this type of news, and this in fact is fake news. If you look at this specifically, it's a nonsense statement because Russians, the election is not a computer. The only thing you can hack is a computer. The election is actually thousands of polling places where people go to vote, and others send in absentee ballots, and then all those results are tallied, and then we go to the Electoral College, and a winner of the election is certified. So why would somebody like Martha, who gets paid $3 million a year, be promoting something that's nonsense? And I'm going to attempt to try to explain that. In order to do that, we're going to go historically to show you that this, in fact, type of phenomena is very common. During the proceedings for Obamacare, their opposition from the Republicans led to a period of time when the government was shut down. Prior to that, President Obama got on TV and said there's going to be terrible things happening if the government shuts down. It'll basically be a catastrophe. In the news media, who in the past have been accused of being essentially operatives for the Democratic Party, in fact actually did operate in that fashion. They started repeating this phrase, catastrophic government shutdown, catastrophic government shutdown. And as a result, millions of Americans came to feel that a catastrophe happened when the government shut down. When in fact, and just for definition, a catastrophe is a sudden calamity or disaster. The government did shut down, and if you didn't actually hear about it from the news media, there would be about 320 million Americans that wouldn't know the government had shut down. So this is actually a false phrase. There was no catastrophe. So if you look at these two statements, they actually have significant common themes. Number one, both of them don't include any facts. There's no factual information, and Republicans caused a catastrophe with the government shutdown, and Russian hacked the election is just a nonsense phrase. Again, you can't hack an election, it's not a computer. But why these are used is because, specifically, they don't cause factual information. You have to fill in the blank, and we have a natural tendency to fill in blanks. So when somebody says Republicans caused a catastrophic government shutdown, even though we might not have a specific information of what exactly that means, our minds will make us think that we do have that information. The same thing with Russians hacked the election. So your mind is going to jump to the conclusion, and the conclusion that they want you to jump to is that they actually changed the outcome of the election. So that's the information that's being shared here. But in order to see how this is manipulation, we have to go back a few steps. And if you remember, it wasn't too long ago, President Obama got up on TV and he said, voters are reading fake news on social media, and that's why they voted for Donald Trump. And then the news reporters did in fact act like Democratic operatives. They all started reporting stories about fake news on social media. Then that ball was dropped, and Hillary Clinton said, the Russians were involved in my election, and the news reporters all started reporting stories about Russian involvement in the election. And to the point of where we are today is that we've moved beyond, according to the news media, that where Russians were involved in the media, but actually they determined the outcome. Recently, John Lewis came out and said that President Trump is not by the way, this is the historic day, it's the inauguration of President Trump. John Lewis, representative from Georgia, said that President-elect is not legitimate because the Russians destroyed Hillary Clinton. And what's significant about that statement is he provided no actual data to back up what he said. He simply attacked the president and by proxy attacked all of us that voted for Donald Trump. And that is an injustice. And it's a bit of an irony because Mr. Lewis is famous as a fighter for justice. In fact, he was severely beaten during the 60s, during the Civil Rights Movement. In one sense, I can empathize with Mr. Lewis, as I was beaten in front of my business and knocked out a few years ago, and filed my police report. For some reason, the police never followed up on it, and they didn't feel it was important. So I can empathize with what it's like to feel to be treated unfairly, and I'm also envious of Mr. Lewis because he actually can profit from his injustice and has written books and has done so. And the point being that Mr. Lewis is in a much more advantageous spot than I am when he can be on national TV and say, attack Donald Trump and the people that voted for him, and folks like myself, we have no such voice. So I'm calling out Mr. Lewis for his promotion of injustice. And if you remember, just on this theme, not too long ago, when the IRS was accused of oppressing citizens and their right to free speech, Mr. Lewis, you would think, would be tailor-made to fight against the IRS. He actually sided with the IRS. People that say that they're going to stick up for us don't always do that. But in the current time, bring us up to speed of where we are in a fake news cycle is that, using the analogy of a magician distracts us while the real thing is going on, and then they play the trick on us. What happened is actually successfully being done if 2/3 of Americans believe the Russians hacked the election. In other words, believe a nonsense statement. It shows that the current news media has been successful in convincing us that we voted for a candidate because of some type of manipulation that the Russians did. How to counter that argument is to ask yourself, has anybody in the government or anybody in the media produced one single piece of data that shows a voter acted on it? And the answer to that question is no, they have not. Mr. Lewis didn't provide any data when he said that the Russians destroyed Hillary Clinton's reputation. He just said it. Recently, Dianne Feinstein, an intelligence person in Congress, said, I've reviewed all this material and I come to the conclusions that the Russians changed the outcome of the election in the same scenario. She didn't provide one single piece of data that shows where the Russians influenced a voter to vote in a certain way. And if you backtrack even further, since the election of Donald Trump, whether it's been President Obama, or people in the media, people in entertainment or in politics, they've been telling us why we voted for Mr. Trump. But if you actually wanted to know why somebody voted for somebody, you would ask them. So to reverse this into what would happen if we had a real news force out there. For example, if we wanted to address the impact of social media on voting, we would survey everybody and say who participates in social media, and then you would have to follow that up with what, say, top 5 pieces of information that you garnered from social media that you acted on to vote for a particular person, and then you would tally that up to see if there was a particular story that influenced people. That didn't happen. The same thing with the Russian influence through the election. You would measure people and say, what top 5 pieces of information did you act, or top 10 pieces of information that you acted on that made you vote for a single person. In this particular story, what we do know is that there is a consensus among the intelligence community that Russian operatives were involved in some hacking of a Democrat National Committee computer. And that's about where it ends. No one has explained what information, if any, that they garnered from it. There's some assumption that the WikiLeaks guy, Julian Assange, got his information from the Russians. He flat out refutes this idea. And then we have to go to the specifics. In order to determine if we're assuming that emails influence people to vote, well, again, how would you do that in a real news story? You would say, okay, list a specific email that influenced you to vote, and whatever your top 5 emails. What we would find, I would think, based on my observation of not knowing, or anybody, and this is just anecdotal, that you can cite a particular email, that this is a false story. So, again, to summarize where we are, what we do know is that there's an intelligence consensus that Russians may have hacked into some emails from the Democrat National Party, and we're still waiting to see if any information they had, or that came from that, influenced anybody to vote. And we don't, that didn't happen. So if you're one of the 2/3 of the people that believe the Russians hacked the election, you've been fooled. And if you would like to learn how to do some critical thinking and use your common sense, write it all down to Fell In Happy Hour 4 to 6 daily. And God bless America.